The morning sun streamed through the small window of Victoria Sterling's cramped art studio apartment, casting golden rays across dozens of unfinished paintings that lined every available wall space. At 23, Victoria had built a sanctuary of creativity in the heart of downtown Portland, where she could lose herself in brushstrokes and color combinations that spoke the language her heart understood best. Her easel held a half-completed landscape of the Oregon coast, each wave meticulously crafted with shades of turquoise and silver that seemed to dance in the morning light. Victoria stood before her canvas, paint-stained apron tied around her. Slender frame, her chestnut hair pulled back in a messy bun that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. Her green eyes held the focused intensity of an artist lost in her work, completely unaware that this would be the last peaceful morning of her old life. She had inherited her father's stubborn determination and her mother's gentle spirit, though lately phone calls from home had carried an undercurrent of worry that she chose to ignore. Her best friend, Lily Chen, burst through the apartment door. With her usual dramatic flair, carrying 2 steaming coffee cups, and wearing the bright smile that had gotten them through for years of art school together, Lily was everything Victoria was not: bold where Victoria was reserved, practical where Victoria was dreamy, and blessed with an ability to see trouble coming from miles away. "Another masterpiece in progress," Lily announced, setting the coffee. On the cluttered table that served as both dining surface and supply storage, "You do realize you have exactly 3 hours before your gallery interview, right? I want it could change your entire career path." Victoria finally looked up from her canvas, accepting the coffee with paint-stained fingers. 3 hours is plenty of time to make myself presentable for the Portland Contemporary Art Gallery. Besides, Mrs. Henderson specifically said she wanted to see my raw talent, not some polished version of myself. The apartment they shared was tiny, but filled with the kind of warmth that comes from genuine friendship and shared dreams. Every surface told a story of their journey through art school: sketches taped to the refrigerator, sculpture projects balanced precariously on shelves, and photographs from gallery openings where they had stood in the background, dreaming of the day their own work would hang on those prestigious walls. Lily settled into the worn velvet chair they had rescued from a thrift store, studying her friend with the concern that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. "Vic, I hate to bring this up again, but your mom called the landline last night while you were out. She sounded really worried about something. Maybe you should call home." Victoria's hand paused mid-sip, her stomach tightening with the familiar anxiety that accompanied any mention of family matters. Her parents, Robert and Catherine Sterling, had always been her strongest supporters, encouraging her artistic dreams, even when it meant financial sacrifice. Her father's construction company had funded her education and living expenses without complaint. Though she knew business had been challenging lately, "I talked to them last week. Everything is fine, Dad. Mentioned some cash flow issues, but that's normal in construction. Projects get delayed, payments get postponed. It happens all the time in his industry." The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway outside made both women pause. Their building was old and creaky, but these footsteps had a purposeful quality that seemed different from their usual neighbors. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the small space, each one carrying an authority that made Victoria's heart skip. "Victoria Sterling," a deep male voice called through the door. "We need to speak with you regarding your family's financial obligations." Lily and Victoria exchanged worried glances, both immediately understanding that whatever waited beyond that door was going to shatter the peaceful bubble of their artistic life. Victoria set down her coffee cup with shaking hands, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. When she opened the door, 2 men in expensive dark suits stood in the narrow hallway. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and eyes that held no warmth. The second was younger, but equally intimidating, holding a leather briefcase that seemed to contain documents of tremendous importance. "Miss Sterling, I am Thomas Drake, representing the business interests of Sebastian Kane. This is my associate, Michael Torres. We need to discuss your father's outstanding debt to Mr. Kane's organization." Victoria felt the walls of her small world closing in around her. Sebastian Kane was a name she had heard whispered in business circles, always accompanied by descriptions like ruthless, brilliant, and unforgiving. He owned half the real estate in the Pacific Northwest and had built a tech empire that stretched across 3 states. Men like Sebastian Kane did not send representatives to tiny art studio apartments unless something had gone terribly wrong. I think there must be some mistake. My father runs a small construction company. We don't have any dealings with someone like Sebastian Kane. Thomas Drake's expression remained unchanged as he opened the briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Sterling Construction received a loan of $12 million 18 months ago to fund the Harborview residential project. The loan was secured against all company assets and carried a personal guarantee from your father. The project failed, Miss Sterling. The loan is now 6 months overdue. The numbers hit Victoria like a physical blow. $12 million was more money than she could comprehend, let alone imagine her family owing to anyone. Her father had never mentioned any project of that magnitude, certainly never indicated they were dealing with someone as powerful and dangerous as Sebastian. Kane Lily appeared at Victoria's shoulder, offering silent support as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Victoria's hands trembled as she accepted the folder from Thomas Drake, her eyes scanning documents filled with legal terminology and financial figures that painted a picture of her family's complete financial ruin. The total amount due, including interest and penalties, now exceeds $15 million. Sterling Construction has no assets remaining that could satisfy even a fraction of this debt. Your parents' home has already been mortgaged beyond its value. There is, however, one solution that Mr. Kane is prepared to consider. Victoria looked up from the documents, her green eyes wide with fear and confusion. What kind of solution?
Mr.
Kane has expressed interest in meeting you personally. He is prepared to forgive the entire debt in exchange for a marriage contract. You would become his wife, and your family would be free of all financial obligations. The words seemed to echo in the small apartment as Victoria processed what she had just heard. Marriage to a stranger, a powerful and reportedly cruel stranger, in exchange for her family's freedom. It was like something from a historical novel, not something that could possibly be happening in the 21st century to an art student who just wanted to paint and dream of gallery exhibitions. That's insane, Lily burst out, her protective instincts overriding her usual caution around intimidating men in expensive suits. You can't just arrange marriages like some kind of medieval transaction. This isn't how the world works. Michael Torres spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a quiet menace that made both young women step back. This is exactly how the world works when you owe Sebastian Kane $15 million. Miss Sterling, you have 48 hours to consider this proposal. After that, we will begin collection proceedings that will result in your family losing everything they have ever worked for. Thomas Drake handed Victoria a business card with an address embossed in gold lettering. If you decide to accept Mr. Kane's proposal, come to this address tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. Come alone and dress appropriately for a formal dinner. After the men left, Victoria and Lily sat in stunned silence on their small couch. The business card and legal documents spread between them like evidence of a crime. Victoria felt as though she was looking at her life from outside herself, watching a young woman whose peaceful existence had just been destroyed by forces completely beyond her control. You can't seriously be considering this, Lily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. People don't get forced into marriages to pay debts. There have to be other options. Legal protections. Something. Victoria stared at the address on the business card, recognizing it as one of the most exclusive areas of the city, where mansions sat behind iron gates and ordinary people like herself never ventured. My parents mortgaged their home to help fund my education, Lily. They sacrificed everything so I could pursue my dreams. If there's a chance to save them from losing everything, how can I not consider it? The phone rang, jarring both women from their troubled thoughts. Victoria recognized her mother's number and answered with a heavy heart, knowing the conversation would confirm her worst fears. Victoria, sweetheart, I need to tell you something important. Catherine Sterling's voice was strained with worry and exhaustion. Your father made some business decisions that have put us in a very difficult position. There are men asking questions about you, and I'm scared. Mom, I know about the debt. Representatives from Sebastian Kane were just here. The silence that followed was filled with her mother's quiet sobs. And Victoria felt her heart breaking for the woman who had always been her source of strength. and encouragement. "We never wanted to involve you in this. Your father thought he could handle it. Find another way to pay. But time has run out, and now they want to drag you into our mistakes." Victoria looked around her small apartment, at the paintings that represented her dreams and the simple life she had built with her best friend. Tomorrow evening, she would walk into Sebastian Kane's world and face a choice that would determine not only her future, but the fate of everyone she loved. "Mom, tell Dad I love him. Tell him I understand and I'm not angry. I'm going to fix this." As Victoria hung up the phone, she realized that the young woman who had woken up that morning, worried about a gallery interview, no longer existed. In her place stood someone who would have to find courage she never knew she possessed, because tomorrow night she would meet the man who held her family's future in his hands. The evening sky over Portland was painted in shades of deep purple and gold as Victoria stood before the imposing iron gates of Sebastian Kane's estate. The address on the business card had led her to a world that existed just 30 minutes from her small apartment, but felt like another planet entirely. Towering oak trees lined the private drive, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the last rays of sunlight into dancing patterns on the manicured grounds below. Victoria had spent hours preparing for this meeting, though no amount of preparation could have readied her for the reality of entering Sebastian Kane's domain. She wore her only formal dress, simple black number that Lily had insisted made her look sophisticated, despite its modest price tag from a discount store. Her chestnut hair was pulled into an elegant updo that revealed the nervous tension in her shoulders, and her hands clutched a small purse that contained nothing more than her identification and a photograph of her parents. The mansion that emerged from behind the ancient trees was a masterpiece of modern architecture blended with classical elements. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the front facade, offering glimpses of crystal chandeliers and artwork that probably cost more than her father's construction company had ever been worth. Stone columns supported a grand entrance where a doorman in formal attire waited with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for the extremely wealthy. "Miss Sterling, Mr. Kane is expecting you in the main dining room. Please follow me." Victoria's heels clicked against marble floors that reflected her image, like mirrors as she followed the doorman through corridors lined with paintings that belonged in museums. Each room they passed seemed larger than her entire apartment, filled with furniture that spoke of generations of wealth and power. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft sound of her footsteps and the distant hum of classical music flowing from hidden speakers. The dining room was a study and controlled opulence. A mahogany table that could seat 20 people, stretched beneath a chandelier that cast warm light over place settings of fine china and crystal. Fresh flowers and elaborate arrangements filled the air with the scent of roses and lilies, creating an atmosphere that would have been romantic under different circumstances. Sebastian Kane stood at the far end of the room, his back to the entrance. As he gazed through French doors that opened onto a terrace overlooking the city below, Victoria's first impression was of a man who commanded space without effort. His tall frame clothed in a charcoal suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for him. When he turned to face her, she understood immediately how he had built an empire through sheer force of will. His dark hair was styled with precision, and his steel-gray eyes held an intelligence that seemed to catalog and evaluate everything they encountered. He was handsome in the way that powerful men often were, not through perfect features, but through the confidence that came from never having heard the word no from anyone who mattered. There was something cold and calculating in his expression as he studied Victoria, as though she were a business acquisition he was considering. "Miss Sterling, thank you for accepting my invitation. I trust you found the address without difficulty." His voice carried the kind of authority that made people listen, smooth and controlled with just a hint of the ruthlessness that had made him legendary in business circles. Victoria felt herself straightening unconsciously, as though her body recognized the presence of a predator even as her mind struggled to process the surreal situation. "Mr. Kane, I came because I need to understand what you expect from this arrangement. My family's debt is their responsibility, not mine." Sebastian gestured toward the chair at the opposite end of the table, waiting until she was seated before taking his own place. The distance between them felt deliberate, a physical representation of the power dynamic that would define any relationship between them. Your family's debt became your responsibility the moment they used your future as collateral. Your father signed documents that specifically mentioned you as part of the business assets. Whether he understood the implications at the time is irrelevant now. A server appeared with wine glasses and began pouring a vintage that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly rent. She accepted the glass with hands that trembled slightly, using the moment to gather her thoughts and study the man who held her family's fate in his hands. Tell me about yourself, Victoria. Your education, your interests, your plans for the future that no longer exists. The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a slap. Sebastian Kane was not pretending this was anything other than a business transaction, and he wanted her to understand exactly how powerless she was in this situation. I graduated from Portland Art Institute with a degree in fine arts. I paint landscapes and portraits, and I was supposed to interview with the Portland Contemporary Art Gallery today for an apprenticeship position. I had plans to build a career. As an artist, to contribute something beautiful to the world, had plans. Past tense. I appreciate the honesty. The first course arrived. An elaborate creation that Victoria barely tasted as she tried to process the reality of her situation. Across the table, Sebastian ate with the mechanical precision of someone who viewed meals as fuel rather than pleasure. Let me explain what marriage to me would entail, since you seem to harbor romantic notions about the arrangement. You would live in this house as my wife in name only. You would accompany me to social functions when required and present the appearance of a happy marriage to the outside world. In exchange, your family's debt would be forgiven, and they would be free to rebuild their lives. Victoria set down her fork, her appetite completely gone, as she absorbed the clinical nature of his proposal. And what do you gain from this arrangement, Mr. Kane? Surely there are women who would marry you willingly for your wealth and status. For the first time since she had entered the room, Sebastian's controlled expression shifted slightly, revealing something that might have been bitterness or old pain. Women who would marry me willingly want access to my money and social position. They view me as a prize to be won or a resource to be exploited. You, Miss Sterling, have no illusions about this being anything other than a business arrangement. That honesty is worth more to me than all the false affection money can buy. The admission revealed more about Sebastian Kane than Victoria suspected he intended. Behind the cold exterior was a man who had learned to trust no one, who had been hurt by people who saw him only as a means to wealth and power. There would be conditions, of course. You would not be permitted to continue your art career in any professional capacity. My wife cannot be seen as someone who needs to work for money. You would dress appropriately for your position, speak only when spoken to at business functions, and maintain the image of a devoted wife at all times. Each condition felt like another bar in a cage that was closing around Victoria's dreams and independence. She thought of her easel waiting in the small apartment, of the gallery interview she had missed, of the future she had worked so hard to build. And if I refuse? Sebastian's gray eyes hardened, and Victoria saw the ruthless businessman who had crushed competitors and destroyed careers without hesitation. Then your father will face criminal charges for fraud. Your parents will lose their home and everything they have worked for their entire lives. Your father will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, and your mother will live in poverty. The choice is yours, Miss Sterling, but choose wisely. The threat was delivered with such calm precision that Victoria felt her last hopes crumble. Sebastian Kane was not making an offer. He was presenting an ultimatum disguised as a choice.
How
long would this marriage last? Till I decide it has served its purpose. Could be 5 years, could be 20. That will depend entirely on how well you fulfill your role as my wife. Victoria looked around the elegant dining room at the luxury that surrounded her like a beautiful prison. She thought of her parents, probably sitting in their modest kitchen at that very moment, worried sick about what their financial troubles had brought upon their beloved daughter. I need some time to think about this. Of course, you have until tomorrow at noon to provide your answer. You agree to the arrangement? We will be married within the week. I see no point in lengthy engagements when this is clearly a business transaction. The remainder of the dinner passed in strained silence, with Victoria barely touching the elaborate courses while Sebastian continued eating as though they had just concluded a routine business negotiation. When the evening finally ended, a car was waiting to take her back to her apartment, where Lily was pacing the small living room with worry etched across her face. How did it go? Please tell me he's not as terrible as his reputation suggests. Victoria collapsed onto their worn sofa, still wearing her black dress, and stared at the ceiling as she tried to find words for what she had experienced. He's exactly as terrible as his reputation suggests, and somehow that makes him perfect for this arrangement. He doesn't want love or affection or even companionship. He wants a business partner who will help him maintain his image while asking for nothing in return. Lily sat beside her best friend, taking her hands in a gesture of support that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. You don't have to do this, Vic. There have to be other options, legal ways to challenge this arrangement. He owns half the judges in the state. Lily, his lawyers could drag out any legal challenge for years, while my parents lose everything they have. At least this way, they get to keep their dignity and their freedom. The next morning arrived gray and rainy, matching Victoria's mood as she made the phone call that would change her life forever. Sebastian Kane's assistant answered on the first ring, as though he had been waiting by the phone. Sterling, I trust you have reached a decision regarding Mr. Kane's proposal. Yes. Please tell Mr. Kane that I accept his terms. Excellent. The wedding will take place this Saturday at Mr. Kane's private estate. Please provide your measurements to my assistant. A wedding dress will be provided. Mr. Kane has also arranged for you to move into the estate immediately following the ceremony. Victoria spent her last week of freedom packing the few possessions that mattered to her, saying goodbye to the life she had built and preparing for a future she could never have imagined. The wedding dress that arrived was beautiful and expensive, though it felt like a costume for a role she was being forced to play. On Saturday morning, Victoria stood before a mirror in a room at Sebastian's estate, wearing white silk and lace that had probably cost more than her college tuition. She looked like a bride. It felt like a prisoner preparing for a life sentence. The ceremony took place in Sebastian's garden, with only the minimum number of witnesses required by law. There were no family members present, no friends to celebrate, no joy or hope for the future. Victoria spoke her vows in a voice that barely carried across the small gathering, while Sebastian's responses were delivered with the same cold precision he had shown during their dinner meeting. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian's kiss was brief and passionless, mere fulfillment of ceremonial requirement. Victoria felt nothing but numbness as she realized she was now Mrs. Sebastian Kane, bound to a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful acquisition. The reception that followed was equally cold and formal, with business associates offering congratulations that felt hollow and meaningless. Victoria smiled and played her part, but inside she was mourning the death of every dream she had ever held dear. That night, alone in the luxurious bedroom that had been designated as hers, Victoria sat by the window looking out at the city lights below. She was now the wife of one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by wealth and luxury beyond imagination, and she had never felt more alone in her life. 3 months had passed since Victoria became Mrs. Sebastian Kane, and she had learned to navigate the gilded cage of her new existence with careful precision. The sprawling mansion had become her world, its marble corridors and crystal chandeliers as familiar as her old apartment had once been. She had developed routines that helped her maintain some sense of identity within the suffocating luxury that surrounded her daily life. Each morning, Victoria would wake in her private suite and walk through the estate's extensive gardens before Sebastian left for his office. The grounds were meticulously maintained by a team of gardeners who worked with the silent efficiency that characterized everything in Sebastian's world. Among the rose bushes and ornamental fountains, Victoria found moments of peace where she could remember who she had been before becoming a trophy wife. Sebastian maintained his distance with the same cold precision he had shown during their first dinner together. He left for his office before dawn and returned after dark, communicating with Victoria only when necessary for social appearances. They attended charity galas and business dinners together, where Victoria had learned to smile at the right moments and make polite conversation that revealed nothing of her true thoughts or feelings. The transformation of Victoria Sterling into Mrs. Sebastian Kane had been thorough and deliberate. Her modest wardrobe had been replaced with designer clothing selected by a personal stylist who understood exactly the image Sebastian wanted his wife to project. Her chestnut hair was now maintained by the city's most exclusive salon, and her makeup was applied each morning by a professional who came to the house before any public appearances yet. Beneath the polished exterior, Victoria felt herself disappearing piece by piece. Her art supplies remained packed in boxes in a storage room, untouched since her arrival at the estate. The gallery apprenticeship she had dreamed of felt like something from another lifetime, a foolish fantasy that belonged to a girl who no longer existed. On this particular morning, Victoria was arranging flowers in the main foyer when James Morrison, Sebastian's personal assistant, arrived with unusual urgency. James was one of the few people in Sebastian's organization who had shown Victoria any genuine kindness during her adjustment to her new life. He was in his early 40s, with graying temples and eyes that held the wariness of someone who had seen too much of human nature's darker sides. "Mrs. Kane, I need to speak with you about a situation that has developed. Mr. Kane is dealing with a crisis that could affect both his business and personal reputation." Victoria set down the flowers, immediately alert to the tension in James' voice. In 3 months of marriage, she had never seen Sebastian's carefully controlled world show any signs of instability. "What kind of crisis, James?" "There's been an accident at one of Mr. Kane's construction sites. A building collapse that has injured several workers. The media is already suggesting that Mr. Kane cut safety corners to maximize profits. If this narrative takes hold, it could destroy everything he's built." Victoria felt a chill run through her as she remembered her father's construction business and the endless safety protocols he had maintained, despite the extra costs involved. She knew how quickly a reputation could be destroyed in the construction industry, especially when lives were at stake. "Where is Sebastian now?" "He's at the accident site, trying to manage the situation personally." "But Mrs. Kane, there's something else you should know. One of the injured workers is asking to speak with you specifically." The request puzzled Victoria, as she had never been involved in any aspect of Sebastian's business operations. James led her to Sebastian's private study, where she could take the call on the secure line that Sebastian used for his most sensitive communications. The voice on the other end of the line was weak but determined, belonging to a man named Carlos Rivera, who had worked construction for over 20 years. "Mrs. Kane, I know you probably don't remember me, but I worked for your father's company about 5 years ago. Robert Sterling was the most honest contractor I ever worked for, always put safety first, even when it cost him money." Victoria's heart clenched at the mention of her father, the first time in months that anyone had acknowledged her life before marriage. "I remember you, Carlos. You worked on the Riverside apartment project with my father." "That's right, Mrs. Kane. The accident today wasn't caused by Mr. Kane cutting corners. The building materials we were using were defective, shipped from a supplier that falsified safety certifications. Your husband is about to take blame for something that wasn't his fault." The information hit Victoria like a revelation. She had spent 3 months watching Sebastian navigate his business world with cold calculation, assuming that his reputation for ruthlessness was entirely deserved. The possibility that he might be facing unjust accusations awakened something protective in her that surprised her completely. "Carlos, do you have proof of what you're telling me?" "I have photographs of the serial numbers on the defective materials and documentation that shows the supplier knew about the problems but shipped them anyway." "But Mrs. Kane, I'm in the hospital, and the media isn't interested in hearing from an injured construction worker. They want to blame the rich businessman." After ending the call, Victoria sat in Sebastian's study surrounded by the trophies and awards that represented decades of business success. The first time since their marriage, she felt a connection to the man she had been forced to marry. He was facing the same kind of unjust destruction that her father had encountered, the same helplessness against forces larger than individual integrity. Without hesitation, Victoria called James back into the study. "James, I need you to drive me to the accident site immediately, and I need you to contact every major news outlet in the city. Tell them that Mrs. Sebastian Kane has a statement to make about today's accident. James stared at her in shock. In 3 months of marriage, Victoria had never taken any independent action or made any public statements without Sebastian's explicit approval. Mrs. Kane, Mr. Kane specifically instructed that you should not become involved in this situation. He wants to protect you from the media attention. Sebastian is trying to protect me, but he doesn't understand that I can protect him too. James, I spent my entire childhood around construction sites with my father. I understand this industry. And I know how to speak to the media about safety issues. The drive to the accident site took Victoria through parts of the city she hadn't seen since her marriage. Past the art galleries and coffee shops that had once defined her world. The construction site was chaos, with emergency vehicles, media crews, and crowds of onlookers creating a scene that looked more like a disaster movie than real life. Victoria spotted Sebastian immediately, standing at the center of the chaos. In a hard hat and work clothes, his expensive suit replaced by practical gear that allowed him to climb through the rubble and speak directly with the rescue workers. She had never seen him like this, covered in dust and sweat, his carefully maintained appearance forgotten in favor of taking direct action to help the injured workers. When Sebastian saw Victoria approaching, his expression shifted from surprise to anger to something that might have been fear. Victoria, what are you doing here? James was supposed to keep you away from this situation. I came because I have information that can help you. Carlos Rivera called and told me about the defective materials. Sebastian, this isn't your fault, and I'm not going to stand by while the media destroys you for something you didn't do. For the first time in their marriage, Sebastian looked at Victoria as though he was seeing her clearly rather than viewing her as a beautiful accessory to his life. Victoria, you don't understand how dangerous this situation is for you. If you associate yourself publicly with this accident, the media will tear you apart. They'll dig into your background, your family, everything. Let them dig. My father taught me that integrity matters more than reputation, and right now your integrity is being questioned unfairly. Before Sebastian could stop her, Victoria walked directly to the cluster of reporters and camera crews that had gathered at the edge of the construction site. She felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that had always accompanied public speaking, but she also felt a strength she hadn't accessed since her marriage. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Victoria Kane, and I want to make a statement about today's accident. The crowd of reporters surged forward, cameras clicking, and microphones thrust toward her as she stood in her designer dress amid the dust and debris of the construction site. My husband, Sebastian Kane, has built his reputation on quality, construction, and worker safety. Before I married him, my father owned Sterling Construction, and I grew up understanding that the construction industry is only as strong as the integrity of the people who work in it. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she found her rhythm, channeling years of watching her father handle difficult situations with honesty and grace. The accident today was caused by defective materials supplied by Morrison Steelworks, a company that falsified safety certifications and knowingly shipped substandard products. I have documentation that proves Morrison Steelworks was aware of the defects but chose to ship the materials anyway to avoid financial losses. The impact of Victoria's statement was immediate and dramatic. Reporters began shouting questions, and Victoria answered each one with the technical knowledge she had absorbed during years of listening to her father discuss construction safety. She spoke about building codes, material specifications, and safety protocols with an expertise that surprised even Sebastian when the impromptu press conference ended. Victoria found herself standing face to face with her husband in front of the media and construction workers who had gathered to watch. Sebastian's gray eyes held an expression she had never seen before, something warm and almost vulnerable. Victoria, you just saved my company and probably my personal reputation. But more importantly, you chose to stand with me when you had no obligation to do so. I had every obligation, Sebastian. I'm your wife, even if this marriage isn't what either of us would have chosen freely. That evening, they returned to the mansion together for the first time since their wedding day. Sitting in Sebastian's private study while news reports played, on the television showing Victoria's press conference, the defective materials scandal was already shifting media, attention away from Sebastian and toward the supplier who had caused the accident. "Victoria, I owe you an apology. I've spent 3 months treating you like a business arrangement when you're obviously much more than that." Victoria studied her husband's face, seeing past the cold mask he wore in public to the man underneath, who had been shaped by years of betrayal and disappointment. "Sebastian, tell me about the woman who hurt you before our marriage, the one who made you decide that love was too dangerous to risk." Gah. Sebastian was quiet for a long time, staring into the fireplace as though the flames held memories he rarely allowed himself to examine. "Her name was Rachel Morrison. We were together for 2 years, and I believe she loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide for her. I was planning to propose when I discovered she was selling information about my business deals to my competitors." The pain in his voice was raw and immediate, as though the betrayal had happened yesterday rather than years ago. "She had access to everything: my financial records, my business strategies, my personal vulnerabilities. She used all of it against me while pretending to love me. When I confronted her, she laughed and told me I was naive to think anyone could love me for anything other than money." Victoria felt her heart breaking for the man who had learned to protect himself by never allowing anyone to get close enough to hurt him. "Sebastian, what happened with Rachel doesn't define every relationship you'll ever have. Some people are capable of genuine love even when money and power are involved. Are you, Victoria? Are you capable of loving someone like me? Someone who forced you into marriage to pay a debt you didn't create?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 3 months of careful distance and the unexpected intimacy of the day's crisis. Victoria realized that somewhere during their conversation, she had moved closer to Sebastian on the couch, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "I don't know, Sebastian, but I know that today when I saw you at that construction site caring more about injured workers than your own reputation, I saw a man I could potentially love. And I know that when you thought I was in danger from the media attention, you were more concerned about protecting me than protecting yourself." Sebastian reached out tentatively, touching Victoria's face with fingers that trembled slightly. "Victoria, if we're going to try to make this marriage into something real, you need to understand that I don't know how to love someone without trying to control them. I don't know how to trust without building walls. I've spent so many years protecting myself that I might have forgotten how to be vulnerable. Then we'll learn together, because I don't know how to love someone who holds all the power in the relationship. I don't know how to be myself when I'm supposed to be the perfect wife. But Sebastian, I think we might be able to help each other figure it out." When Sebastian kissed her, it was nothing like the cold, ceremonial kiss they had shared at their wedding. His kiss was filled with 3 months of careful distance dissolving into genuine connection, fear transforming into hope, and the possibility that 2 people forced together by circumstances might choose to stay together by love. The next morning, Victoria woke to find an easel set up in the sunroom overlooking the gardens, along with professional-grade paints and brushes that must have cost more than her entire collection of student supplies. Sebastian stood nearby, still in his pajamas and robe, looking uncertain in a way she had never seen before. "I thought maybe you might want to start painting again. Not for money or career, but just because it makes you happy." Victoria walked to the easel and picked up a brush, feeling the familiar weight of creative possibility in her hands. When she turned back to Sebastian, she was smiling the first genuine smile she had offered him since their marriage. "Sebastian Kane, I think I'm going to enjoy being married to you after all." Outside the sunroom windows, the gardens bloomed with the promise of spring, and inside, 2 people who had been forced together by debt and desperation began the much more difficult and rewarding work of choosing to love each other freely